Hey, HTDA and welcome back to Dyson Sphere Program. Today I continue my quest to design a playstyle that keeps all buildings relevant, is easy to scale up, allows for easy adjusting to the new combat update, and above all is easy to play. And I have to admit, it kind of feels like I'm cheating at this point, because at the end of this episode we'll have all 5 different colors of science in production, and more importantly, we have access to all the warpers we need, and it's all super easy. Now, before we get into that, as promised, the user that got the most likes under his or her comment in the previous episode got a planet named after him or her, and that was in this case JRed65541, so congrats on making your name eternal in my system. Now, since it was the second comment that got quite a few likes, I decided why not name a planet after that person as well, because, well, I have another planet left in my system, so congrats to I Like Epicurus as well. And last but not least, thank you Blind Ender for becoming a member of the channel, and you now have a star named after you. Okay, so what do we need in order to get green science? Well, actually not that much, because we already have these 3 types of science in production. However, in order to actually make the green science, we're going to need lenses as well as quantum chips. And in order to make those things, we're going to need a couple of things that actually need purple science. So we need these plane filters that need the purple science as well as the quantum chips. Now, in order to make purple science, you can actually unlock that really early. We're going to need to produce a few other things like processors. We are already producing processors, but we need a little bit more of that. And we also need the particle broadband. So make sure you focus on unlocking all those technologies, because we're rapidly going to scale things up and get to that green science. Now, I do want to point out that when I'm talking about scaling up rapidly, I don't necessarily mean upgrading everything you already have. It's really tempted to replace all these Mark 1 belts and these Mark 1 assemblers with the upgraded versions. You can if you want. However, as you can see, for example, over here, I have 10,000 of each of the basic resources in here. We're going to rapidly burn through this at some point during this episode, don't get me wrong, but there's no point in upgrading this facility until we actually need it, and it will take a while for us to burn through the 10,000 units that we already have. Okay, so speaking about burning through resources, we're definitely going to do that with this processor build, because this is going to drain a lot of the silicon that we already have in production. Now, it's a very simple layout. We are using all the base resources as usual to make all the items that are needed for the processor. So we're making some circuit boards, we're making some of these, what are these called again? Microcrystalline components, that's a mouthful. And then the processors here. Now, this is not perfectly balanced, although it is almost perfectly balanced. If you want, you can add proliferators in the belts over here. I haven't really made up my mind about whether or not I'm going to do that. There's actually going to be a couple of comments at the end of this episode probably, so make sure you watch until that point. And one thing I would recommend is build one side first and then focus on building the other side, just so this can already start producing. Now, there's actually quite a few of our buildings that require processors, like, for example, the drones, the PLS, the ILS, and stuff like that. So I recommend making sure that at this point you build one of our mega distributors over here to make sure those processors have somewhere to go. Now we've made sure that all those vital buildings are actually being produced, it's time to scale up to something new. And in this case, that's going to be the crystal silicon. This is going to draw heavily on your silicon supply. As you can see, I already drew in the maximum amount and there's not that much being added. So if you want to play this safe, you can just limit this a little bit and also limit the production. You're not going to need massive amounts of these. I'm usually really lazy and I just set this to the max because it will solve itself in a little while. But if you want to be a bit more efficient than I am, just make sure that you put these amounts lower. Just make sure that you have production, but not necessarily massive stockpiles. Now, the reason I'm actually making the crystal silicon at this point is because I'm planning ahead. Why? Well, I'm going to be making some of these accumulators. Now, I would highly recommend that once you start adding these more high-tech buildings to your mall, that you limit the storage units to maybe 1 or 2 slots, otherwise you're going to waste a lot of resources in there. Accumulators by themselves, of course, are not very useful, so we're going to need some energy exchangers to go along with that. Now, again, make sure you limit storage units, and specifically these things need the titanium alloy as well, so if that is not actually being supplied by your drones, just drop maybe a stack or so in here and get it to produce. You only need a couple of these. And why only a couple? Well, you want a tiny little charging station like this. I love the energy exchanger building. This is one of the most beautiful buildings in the game, in my opinion. They're really large though, so they're not very practical. Just remember that you need to set this to charge, and that this won't actually charge anything unless you have a surplus of power. Now again, you only need a few stacks of these charged accumulators, so make sure that you keep a surplus of power until you have that. And then the last part of this pre-planning phase is the setup for the orbital collectors. Now keep in mind that orbital collectors are being made from ILSs, and in order to make sure that you don't get into issues later on, don't build this until you have a couple of stacks of these ILSs in your inventory good to go. Because all the ILSs that you're producing over here will automatically be transported into the orbital collector build and will then be transformed into the orbital collectors. And that's not necessarily a problem, it just means that you won't actually be getting any new ILSs until we optimize our production. So keep that in mind. And again, for the rockets, because you need titanium alloy in order to make these, I would recommend just dropping a couple of stacks in here manually if they're not being delivered right now. We're going to fix all of those delivery issues in a moment, but for now, you might have to do a couple of things manually while you're building that. Just drop a few stacks in there, get it going, and then focus on the rest. This also happens to be a perfect time to expand your power, because again, you need that surplus power for those accumulators, and well, you're going to be massively expanding very quickly in a moment, so make sure you first build your power and then start expanding. So speaking about expanding, the titanium alloy production is really easy to fix with a very simple modular build like I have over here, drawing in the base resources. Again, these are all base resources, including the sulfuric acid, because remember, this is a rare resource. You can mine that straight from sulfuric acid planets with those lakes that you have on there. So make sure that you don't include this in your production chain, because otherwise you're just going to be wasting all that rare resources. Anyway, so we have that production set up here. It's actually feeding into a second ILS over here, and then this ILS is already set up to also make these frame materials. Why? Well, you can't actually make them just yet, because we also need the carbon nanotubes for that, and we're not mass producing those at this point. But we're going to need a lot of these anyway, so I figured why not just set it up good to go. And in the meanwhile, we're producing massive amounts of titanium alloy. And of course, we need to distribute that as well, so make sure you set up one of your distributors in order to make sure this can actually reach your buildings, because remember, those are being connected by the bots and not by drones. But if you do it like this, for example, over here, as you can see, we now have titanium alloy being easily distributed to all the different buildings that need it. At this point, you'll probably find that some of your basic resources are running out. As you can see, for example, the silicon is no longer in high supply anymore, so we're going to need to upgrade some of our base facilities. Now remember, in order to do that, just remove all the horizontal belts. And then if you haven't done so yet, I would recommend going to the sandbox mode, designing one of the larger versions of this build, and then just copy pasting it straight over the build you already have. Just press shift enter, and it will stamp the remaining buildings on top. And again, there's usually a gap that exists somewhere in the build. I'm not entirely sure why this happens, but just connect these few belts and you're good to go. I really like how this mall planet is slowly starting to turn out. I also really like that I'm now actually using some of the more northern and southern parts of the planet as well. I actually want to see if we can keep all the production on a single planet rather than spreading things out across multiple planets like I did in my previous playthrough. I already made a start with that with the titanium alloy and the frame material build over here. That's actually fitting right neatly into this zone over here. And next up is one of my favorite builds ever, and we're going to need a lot of the refineries in order to make that. Ta-da! The massive oil build. This is one of those builds that's very, very long, but fits very neatly in the more northern or southern parts of your planet. All it is just a single line of oil coming in, and then all these refineries are intended to transform that into refined oil and hydrogen. This is going to produce all the oil and hydrogen that you're going to need for a very, very long time. Well, maybe not the hydrogen, but at least the oil will last you a very long time. But you can always just duplicate this build if you ever run out of oil. But again, this is going to be mass producing this, so it'll take a while. As a side note, and I'd like to know in the comments what you think about this, but I don't recommend using the reforming refine recipe. So this actually allows you to turn oil, refined oil with hydrogen and coal, into more refined oil. So it's a nice way to upgrade your oil production because you don't have a lot of that on your starting planet. However, this actually costs you hydrogen, And that's a resource you're going to want a lot of very soon. And at the point that you actually need more oil, you're also about to unlock the green warpers, as you will see in a moment. So yeah, I don't recommend using this recipe, but I'm actually curious to find out in the comments whether you guys do use this recipe or not. The same holds for the X-ray cracking. I never use this, for the very simple reason that this actually takes the oil at the point that you need it and turns it into more hydrogen, but it's not a super efficient recipe. So let me know in the comments, do you actually use this or not? So let's put all that oil to use with the largest build I've made so far, and that's just because chemicals are a pain in the ass. Yeah, this build is really large, so just let me show you in comparison to the other builds that we've made so far. It's about 2 times as big, maybe 3 times, so very, very big, but we're going to need a lot of different materials. So this actually takes a while to build because it's almost 3,600 buildings, so just under the blueprint limit. But it's worth it because I'm producing not just the plastic over here that we're going to need a lot of, but I'm also going to be able to produce a little bit of these assets until we get warpers. We don't have a rare resource for that. Then we're also producing the most important item actually, the graphene over here. And then last but not least, we're also producing at least a small amount of carbon nanotubes in here. Now, as you can see, I have a lot of resources already coming in, but not everything. And the reason for that is that although we have some of the inputs that we need for that, I haven't actually set up water and stone just yet. Now, of course, that's super easy to fix by just flying back to your main planet and dropping a couple of rows of these water pumps, as well as a couple of these miners making some stone production. I highly recommend not overcomplicating your power on your home planet. It's a pain to actually fill in all these oceans and make nice little circles around the planet with these solar panels. I would recommend just spreading a couple of these fields of these solar panels. It's actually kind of realistic because that's how we do it in real life as well. Just make sure they're all connected so you're not wasting power on several different grids. But other than that, this should be just fine in order to get you all the power you need. Again, just spread a couple of these things around on the planet and you'll be just fine. We're actually going to need more chemicals, so that is where this second build comes in. It's a setup very similar to the first one that I have right next to it. In this case, I'm again making some plastic, but we're also going to make organic crystal and then turn that organic crystal into titanium crystals. This is very important because you're going to need a ton of these in order to get your resource as well as your production going in a moment. For the same reason, I also automated the diamond production so we can start automating the yellow signs on this planet. Again, remember, I want to keep everything on a single planet. And then over here, once again, I'm making some more nanotubes and I'm also making some Casimir crystals. Now the Casimir crystals, as you might know, they need a ton, and I do mean a ton of hydrogen. They also need the titanium crystals, so make sure that you're not overproducing that. Now, my build is actually filled up with Casimir crystals over here, but I'm going to remove most of these in order to make sure I don't waste too much of the titanium production initially. So that looks something like this. I can always add in the Casimir crystals later on, but for now I just want to keep it simple and just produce a tiny amount of this to get it going again and make sure we're stockpiling the rest of the titanium crystals. Now, as you noticed, I also have the nanotubes in production here once again, and that's because this allows me to draw in the graphene manually without having to actually make it, because graphene can be made from rare resources as well. So this is just a backup production for nanotubes that will be more efficient later on. The groundwork is done, and now we get to the fun part, so we get to scale up to the new types of science. In order to do that, we're going to need that broadband that I showed you earlier, and this is a very simple build, just making that. Now, this is a little bit different from the other builds that I've done, where we're making most of the other items in the build itself, but in this case, I just actually decided not to do that. That has a downside, because the carbon nanotubes are actually being used for the frame material as well. So over here in this build that I just showed you, we're also requesting this. So now we have competing destinations for the nanotubes, and we're not mass producing that just yet. So see if you're actually receiving a little bit in both of these builds, especially in the broadband build over here. Again, you don't need this to be mass producing just yet. That will fix itself in time once we really start to scale up in the end game. We're just getting it ready. But you do want to see some production over here. Just maybe a couple of hundred is enough to get you going. Just make sure that you actually get it going. And if that's an issue, then all you need to do is just turn off the demand in the frame material build, because as you can see, we have a couple of thousand in here as well. All you need to do is just set it to remote supply for a moment, and that problem is fixed. I'm pretty much building my mall on the top half of the planet, so I decided why not just use the bottom half of the planet for the science production. A very simple layout for the science production is something like this, as you can see over here, just an ILS with 2 outgoing belts and 1 incoming belt and a couple of production facilities. Now, of course, you can stack these up. I just made it very simple and very low initially, just to make sure you don't get into any issues with the verticality limit that you might not have unlocked just yet. As you can see, I'm still researching the first few levels over here. This will make sure you can always place it down. Place that down 4 times, scale it up, and set the recipes according to the different colors, and you're good to go. Now, the blue and the red signs will probably start producing instantly. The other 2 types, not so much. But as you can see, we just got the first processors in here, and we already have some broadband. So we are now producing purple signs as well as yellow signs. And again, not a massive amount, but we can deal with that later. And of course, that science is not going to be of any use without an actual science dome to process all that science. And I'm just going to turn the lights off for a moment. Isn't this just the most beautiful disco you've ever seen? Anyway, this build is a little bit different from the science dome I've used in my previous playthroughs, because it's already set up in such a way that it will actually allow me to go all the way to white science. So you can see there's 6 belts across the circle, so 5 of those are going to be used for the different colors initially. That will be used to actually research those technologies that we are still lacking. Then the 6th belt at some point will be the antimatter that we can use to make white science, and then we have the 7th belt exporting that science and putting that all the way into a second ILS, and then at some point we'll actually be exporting the white science to a new facility. With purple science in production, we need a couple of new buildings to get to the green ones. Specifically, we're going to need particle colliders, so make sure you add a little build for that. And we are going to need, at least I use, the fractionator in order to make the deuterium. Now, you can actually do that with the particle colliders as well, but these things are super expensive. And they're really slow to produce, and they drain a lot of power. So I just prefer using the fractionators instead, mostly because the build looks really cool. In order to make those 2 buildings, we actually need to automate a couple of things that we hadn't automated yet, namely these concrete as well as the glass. And I figured, well, while I'm at it, why not just make the titanium glass as well and the plane filters as a result of that, because all of that is actually used with very similar resources. You only need some stone, some water, some titanium, and some casimir crystals, and you're done. So a very small and simple build, but this actually adds 4 new items to our mall. Now, if the previous build was lazy, this is going to be even lazier, because what I did was I took the turbine build. As you can see, I only upgraded half, so you can see, yes, I actually did use the blueprint for the base turbine buildings first. Then I added in another ILS, and I added 2 production rows, 1 for the particle containers and then 1 for the strange matter, because all you need to do is add in some graphene as well as the turbines in order to make the particle containers. You already have copper in the build, so I just split off another production line for the copper and just split it off and made sure the particle containers you could use it too. And then for the strange matter, all you need is some iron. Again, you already have that, so it's very easy to just demand that over here, or just transport it with the belt directly from the first ILS. That's up to you. But most importantly, we're going to need deuterium, which we're not actually producing just yet. So this build is not going to do a whole lot other than just stockpiling a little bit of particle containers. We'll worry about the deuterium in a second, because I want to set up a couple of very straightforward builds first. As you can see, this is the most simple build you can ever think of for the lenses over here. Just drawing in the resources, transporting them to a assembler, and then exporting them straight back into the same ILS. And again, a very similar build for the quantum processors as well. As you can see, I already made a couple of these. All you need for that is the plane filters that we already made. So this is why it's right next to the build where we're making those, and some processors to go along with that. And then, of course, a very simple science build in order to actually make the green science. It won't be working yet because we're not producing lenses. As you can see, the quantum chips have already arrived. And I also recommend adding in a couple of assemblers like I have over here in order to make warpers from green science, and then a small little box with a distributor on top of that to grab some of those out. You don't need a lot of those, just make sure it grabs out 1 or 2 stacks so you have your own personal supply. With that prep work done, let's add some stackers to them all. so I can build the most entertaining build in the game, and that is the one that makes the fractionators turn the hydrogen into deuterium. All you need to do is have a massive amount of hydrogen coming in, stack that up to a stack of 4, then transport that into a circular belt into fractionators, and they will start spitting out the deuterium. As you could see, the deuterium is being produced in a massive amount in here, so this also means that all the other buildings that we already have prepared now are starting to produce strange matter, the lenses and so on. Now this build actually needs a moment to get up and running. As you can see, there is some thought put in here where the belts are actually put in such a way that this belt will also always be running, and the new items are only being transported in from the perpendicular side, so this doesn't actually block the belt, and the stackers are actually being put in some of the places in this belt built in order to restack the depleted stacks that were initially going through the fractionators. Now you can optimize this build a little bit further if you want by adding some more of these spiders in here, but honestly this works just fine. And this means that we now have everything in production that we need for green science, so we should also have some decent stockpiles of warpers getting ready for us. Now, as soon as you have like a single stack of warpers, you can go anywhere in the universe that you want, and you have access to all the rare resources and stuff like that, assuming, of course, that you actually unlock the drive engine level 4, so you can actually warp around. So in this episode, you've heard me say about a few dozen times probably, like, okay, this build isn't working optimally, we'll deal with that later. Now is later, so you should be going to, for example, your home planet, getting some more of that coal that you need for like graphite and graphene production. But most importantly, what you should be doing is grab some of those orbital collectors and place them on your nearest gas giant. Hopefully that one has fire ice. If it has deuterium, that's fine too, but then you're going to want to find the nearest system that does have fire ice and get some of that, because this is going to make your life a lot easier. It does mean you actually need to build a whole circle around a gas giant, which is a pain to do, but it's worth it. Because once you have fire ice, you can make a simple build like this that draws in the fire ice. I actually combine it with the spiniform over here because that makes the nanotubes, and might as well just combine two rare resources in a single build. But the fire ice is most important because this is going to allow you to easily produce massive amounts of graphene, and that is by far the largest bottleneck that you'll have at this stage of the game. And with that build done, we're now actually producing all the different types of science at a pretty decent rate, and we're burning through the remaining science technologies really fast. Most importantly, we have all the warpers we're ever going to need. So you can see I have a fair amount of green science coming in now, and each of these little green blocks is 8 different warpers, so we can warp around the universe as much as we want. Now, I'm not breaking any speed records here in terms of gameplay, but this is probably my personal record in terms of getting to this stage of the game this fast. It's about 19 hours, and I've not been trying to build fast in any way, so this is just me playing at a leisurely speed on autopilot, like the whole purpose of this gameplay was or is. And we're already at the green science in episode 3, so I'd say that's pretty damn fast. Now, as promised, a couple of notes, because even though this playstyle is by far my most favorite one yet, it does come with a few points of attention. So first of all, the reason it's going so fast is I haven't actually upgraded anything I don't need. So again, for example, over here you see the iron factory that's still running on the original design, while over here I have an upgraded version because I did need some more resources. I just didn't need 2 full builds of them. So skipping everything you actually don't need means you're a lot more efficient. You reutilize the previous builds, also make sure that you don't have to like completely redesign your factory and things like that. It saves a lot of time. However, it does mean you need to be very intentional about what you build in what order, so I recommend sticking to the order that I just showed you. The builds themselves are not that complicated. They are sort of built around a perfect ratio, but most of the builds are built in such a way that we're actually overproducing the initial items, so we're actually getting a surplus of all the different items that are being built in the build itself. But other than that, there's nothing special about that. Combining all the different types of items into the build, like I've done in this episode, does make it very easy to scale up later on, because you get a lot of different items from a single build. That just feels really good. But other than that, there's not too much special around that. Another reason why I think this playthrough is feeling so easy and efficient is that we're actually using, I think, what is probably the perfect balance between bots, belts, and drones. So the bots are now exclusively used in the mall, which is super efficient, not only because we're using these mega distributors to actually get the resources to the mall, which is super efficient because the drones are actually mass transporting the required resources, and then we have so many different sources for those resources to be transported to the mall that it's impossible for a single building to hog all those resources, because there are so many different sources. They're spread out, so that automatically means that the resource will be spread out between the different mall buildings as well. Now, the drones themselves are of course very efficient to get things from A to B, but because we're also using the belts to connect the different builds, so for example the copper and silicon going into the processor build over here, just means that we are avoiding a lot of those congestion things that can happen when all the drones are transporting something from A to B, but they are not focusing on different sources, but they're all going to the same target. So the belts fix that, and I also really like how we're making different items within the same build, and sometimes even a whole production chain, for example with the processors, but also with the glass and the titanium glass, and then the planar filters over here. Things like that just makes it less likely that you'll actually get into issues with your buildings where you're producing something but then have a complete lack of a certain resource somewhere else in your production chain. Another reason why I think this playthrough is feeling so easy and optimal is that I found the perfect balance now between bots, drones, and belts. The bots excel at actually transporting things within our mall. They're awesome in that way, and I really love how the mega distributors are working because of supplying the mall with a lot of different sources for the different types of resources means that it's extremely unlikely that everything will be funneled into a single direction, which was something that did happen in my previous few playthroughs every now and then. Now, although the drones are doing most of the heavy lifting, actually connecting a couple of the builds with some belts makes just again sure that you don't run out of a single resource, or again have those kind of tunnel visioning drones where they're all transporting everything to a single type of production chain. Now, for example, you can see over here the copper and silicon going into my processor build, and like I just showed you before, the planar filters are going straight into the build for the quantum processors. Things like that just means that you have less drones flying around, less power being wasted, and you're actually guaranteeing that at least some part of the resource are going to the intended destination. It is, however, really easy to mess this up because I'm using kind of a minimalist approach to what I've been building in what order. So for example over here, I normally would be inclined to say like, okay, I don't know, the acid that's coming in here is like not that much. Should I be adding more acid and then make another build for that and stuff like that? As you can see, I am getting in a decent flow of acid, although it's not going to come in massive amounts. For now, this actually means that I do have a steady flow coming in, so if I build more acid production, I'm probably going to mess up some other part of my production chain. While leaving it as it is, you'll just guarantee that I'm getting a little bit of everything, and that is all you need in this stage of the game. I've also decided to be a little bit more pragmatic about my power supply. I'm only using solar panels and some wind energy. So no deuterium, no other fuel rods, things like that. Let's keep it very simple. And basically utilizing all the space in between my builds just by putting in some solar panels. And that's actually working just fine, no need to overcomplicate it, and this is very easy and straightforward to build. Now, as you can see, I'm actually filling up my mole planet really quickly now, but we do have some space left, and mostly on the southern part of the planet. So I think we will just fine in order to complete the entire game on a single planet, which could be really useful with the combat update in mind, because that means we only need to really defend one single planet from alien invasions, and all the other planets are basically just there to give us some resources to mine. And I'll end it here with this stunning shot of our planet. It's turning out really beautiful. I hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I hope to catch you in the next one.